What happens when the invisible are finally seen in the glittering world of New York's elite, where fortunes are flaunted and status is everything? A simple waitress can be less than a ghost. This is the story of Emia Vance, a young woman with a secret talent, serving champagne to people who wouldn't give her a second glance. And it's the story of Tiffany Blackwood, the girlfriend of a billionaire, a woman who wore her cruelty like a designer handbag. One cruel comment, one dismissive laugh over a simple handmade dress was all it took to set a chain of events in motion that no one could have predicted. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about revenge. It's about what happens when a hidden masterpiece is dragged into the light. The air inside Elysian was different. It seemed to be filtered through money, each particle scrubbed clean of the city's grit, leaving only the scent of truffle oil vintage perfume and quiet, unshakable power. To Emia Vance, it was both a stage and a prison. By day she was a designer, a creator, a dreamer surrounded by bolts of silk sketches and the hum of her grandmother's old sewing machine. But by night, 5 times a week, she was just another part of the decor at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Her uniform was a sleek black sheath dress, impeccably tailored, but designed to make her disappear. She was a shadow meant to anticipate needs without being noticed, to glide between tables laden with A5 Wagyu and glasses of Chateau Margaux, her presence as fleeting as a forgotten thought. Tonight, the low, ambient hum of conversation was pierced by a laugh. It was a sharp, crystalline sound, practiced and perfect. It belonged to Tiffany Blackwood. Tiffany was not just a diner, she was an event. Seated across from her was Jaden Croft, a man whose name was synonymous with tech innovation and a net worth that had more commas than most people's bank account numbers. He was handsome in a way that was almost severe, sharp jaw, intense eyes, a stillness that suggested he was analyzing everything around him. Tiffany, by contrast, was all motion and light. Her platinum blonde hair was a flawless sheet. Her diamonds caught the low light and fractured it into 1,000 tiny rainbows, and her dress was a crimson slash of Valentino that likely cost more than Emia's entire student debt. Emia approached their table, her silver tray held steady. "Mr. Croft, Ms. Blackwood, may I offer you another bottle of the Waitress?" she asked, her voice calm and professional, a carefully constructed mask. Jaden Croft nodded his eyes, briefly flicking to her, before returning to Tiffany. But Tiffany's gaze didn't move. It was fixed on Emia, specifically on the collar of Emia's uniform. Peeking out from beneath the severe black neckline was a tiny, intricate detail, the edge of the blouse Emia wore underneath. It was her own design, a small act of rebellion. The fabric was a soft periwinkle blue, and along the collar she had hand-stitched a delicate pattern of silver thread that mimicked the veins of a leaf. It was subtle, personal, and the only piece of her she brought into this world of theirs. Tiffany's perfectly arched eyebrow lifted. She leaned forward, her voice a conspiratorial whisper, loud enough for the entire section to hear. "Jaden, look at this. It's quaint." Emia froze for a fraction of a second. Tiffany's eyes, the color of a winter sky, raked over Emia. She pointed a manicured finger, its nail a perfect almond of glossy nude polish. The waitress's outfit, that little homemade thing sticking out. "Did you sew that yourself, darling? It reminds me of a craft project I did in the 3rd grade." The words were like tiny sharp icicles. A few people at the nearby tables shifted uncomfortably, their gazes darting away. Jaden's expression tightened, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes as he looked from Tiffany to Emia. Emia felt a hot flush creep up her neck. Her blouse. It wasn't just a blouse. It was hours of work, A test pattern for a new collection. She was designing a collection she was pouring her soul and every last cent into. The silver thread was imported from a small supplier in France. The design was hers, born from a sketch she'd made on a napkin during a lonely lunch break. She kept her composure, a lifetime of practice at swallowing pride clicking into place. "It's just my blouse, ma'am," she said, her voice even. "Oh, I know what it is." Tiffany purred, a smirk playing on her lips. She turned to Jaden, her voice dripping with faux pity. "It's just so sad, isn't it, trying so hard with so little? Some people just don't understand that fashion is about brands, darling. It's about legacy, not whatever that is." She waved a dismissive hand in Emir's direction. "You can clear the plates." Emir nodded silently, her hands moving with robotic precision as she gathered the dishes. Her fingers brushed against the cool porcelain, but all she could feel was the burning humiliation. She didn't dare look at Jaden Croft, but she could feel his eyes on her. It wasn't a look of pity, but of scrutiny. It was intense and unnerving, as if he were trying to deconstruct her, to see the stitches and seams of her very being. As she turned to walk away, her tray laden with the remnants of their $100 appetizers, she heard Tiffany's final cutting remark to Jaden. "Honestly, you have to wonder where people even get things like that. The poor thing probably thinks it's high fashion." Emir walked back towards the swinging doors of the kitchen, her back straight, her steps measured. But inside, something had fractured. It wasn't just the insult. It was the casual, effortless cruelty of it. It was the way Tiffany had used fashion, Emir's passion, her art, her dream as a weapon to remind her of her place. In the chaotic, steamy heart of the kitchen, she paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. The clatter of pots and the shouts of the chefs were a welcome cacophony, drowning out Tiffany's voice in her head. She looked down, touching the delicate silver leaf stitching of her collar. Quaint, homemade, sad. A single tear of anger and frustration escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek. She wiped it away furiously. Tiffany Blackwood had no idea who she was. She had no idea what she was looking at. And as Amaya stacked the plates with more force than necessary, a tiny, dangerous spark ignited in the ruins of her pride. She didn't want revenge. She wanted justice. The kind of justice that comes not from tearing someone down, but from building yourself up so high they can't help but see you. Emir's apartment was a fifth-floor walk-up in a part of Brooklyn that real estate agents generously called up-and-coming. It was small, the pipes groaned at night, and the view from her single window was of a brick wall, but it was her sanctuary, and it was more than anything a studio that she happened to sleep in. Every surface was covered in the beautiful chaos of creation. A dress form named Florence stood in the corner, draped in a half-finished muslin prototype. Jars bristled with pencils, shears, and pattern-making tools. The walls were a collage of fabric swatches, inspirational photos torn from magazines, and most importantly, her sketches. Hundreds of them. Designs for elegant evening gowns, chic business wear, and avant-garde pieces that pushed the boundaries of form. This was the real Emoa. Not the silent black-clad waitress, but a vibrant, passionate artist. Her brand, the one that existed only in her sketchbooks and on a handful of custom pieces for friends, was named Aura. The idea was that clothing wasn't just something you wore. It was an extension of your inner light, your aura. Tonight, however, the sanctuary felt like a cage. Tiffany Blackwood's words echoed off the brick wall outside her window. Quaint, homemade, sad. She sank onto her stool, the exhaustion of her shift settling deep into her bones, mingling with the bitter sting of humiliation. She pulled the blouse off, laying it carefully on her work table. Under the bright, focused light of her desk lamp, The silver stitching shimmered. It wasn't quaint. It was precise. It wasn't homemade. It was handmade, a world of difference Tiffany would never comprehend. For a moment, she felt the overwhelming urge to give up. What was the point? She was sketching dreams in a tiny apartment, while women like Tiffany Blackwood wore reality woven from the looms of famous Italian houses. She was a tiny rowboat trying to navigate a sea of super yachts. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her best friend Chloe, a sharp-witted journalist who worked for a struggling online magazine. Chloe Yu alive. How was the land of the ludicrously wealthy tonight? Emaya typed back, her fingers heavy. Emaya met the devil. She wears Valentino. She quickly recounted the incident. Chloe's reply was instantaneous and furious. Chloe Tiffany Blackwood. Of course, the woman is famous for being famous. Her only discernible talent is attaching herself to powerful men. Don't you dare let her get to you, Emaya. She's all surface, you're all substance. The words were a small comfort. Substance. It felt like a flimsy shield against a diamond-tipped spear. Defeated, she opened her laptop. There was an email she had been both anticipating and dreading. It was from the New York Emerging Designer Showcase, a prestigious competition that could launch a career overnight. The deadline for final submissions, a portfolio, and a physical signature piece was in 1 week. This was her shot, her one real chance to get out of Elysian and into the world she belonged in. She had been working for months on her submission, a stunning evening dress of deep indigo silk. It was ambitious, complex, and she'd poured everything she had into it. But now, looking at the sketches, doubt clouded her vision. Was it good enough? Or was it, as Tiffany had implied, just a more elaborate version of a third-grade craft project? She closed her eyes. Tiffany's mocking smirk burned into her mind. The humiliation was a physical weight. But then something else surfaced. The memory of Jaden Croft's eyes, the way he had looked at her. It wasn't with pity. It was analytical, curious, as if he had seen something Tiffany had missed entirely, as if he had looked past the waitress uniform and seen the designer. Or maybe she was just projecting. No, she couldn't let that woman's casual cruelty derail her life's ambition. Chloe was right. Tiffany was surface. Emia was substance, and her substance was her art. A new fire began to burn through her exhaustion. It was anger, yes, but it was also a fierce, protective love for her own work. She wouldn't let it be devalued. She would prove its worth. She turned back to her work table, her eyes falling on the periwinkle blouse. She picked it up, feeling the soft fabric tracing the silver stitches with her finger. That intricate leaf vein pattern. It was the heart of her design philosophy, finding extraordinary beauty in ordinary natural forms. An idea began to form, a dangerous, defiant thought. The indigo dress for the competition was beautiful, but it was safe. What if she submitted something else? Something that was purely, unapologetically her? She grabbed her sketchbook and a charcoal pencil. The lines flowed from her fingers, fast and urgent. She began to sketch a new dress. The silhouette was sleek and modern, but the fabric and detailing were where the magic was. She imagined a whole dress made from that periwinkle blue silk, a color that was both soft and strong, and all over the bodice, cascading down one side and onto the skirt, would be that same silver leaf vein embroidery, not as a subtle detail, but as the magnificent, undeniable centerpiece. It would be a declaration. It would be a dress that said, "You called this quaint. You called this sad. Then watch what this sadness can become." She would work all week, skip sleep, live on coffee and sheer willpower. She would pour every ounce of the pain from that night into the seams of this dress. Tiffany Blackwood had tried to make her feel small. Instead, she had given her a reason to be bigger and bolder than she had ever dared to be before. She would wear her homemade art like a suit of armor. This dress wouldn't just be for the competition. This dress was for her. It was her aura made visible. The next 24 hours were a blur of numb professionalism. Emiya went back to Elysian for her Friday night shift, her mind a million miles away, replaying stitches and seam allowances. She was relieved to see that table 12, the prime corner booth where Jaden Croft and Tiffany Blackwood had sat, was occupied by a quiet older couple celebrating an anniversary. She moved through the motions of her job, her face a neutral mask, her spirit tucked away safely in her Brooklyn studio with her sketches. When her shift finally ended after 1 a.m., she all but ran to the subway, a sense of urgency propelling her forward. The dress was calling to her. The humiliation from the night before had transmuted into pure, unadulterated creative energy. She spent the entire next day, Saturday, in a focused trance. The world outside her apartment ceased to exist. Her phone went unanswered. The periwinkle silk, which she'd been saving for something special, was unrolled like a bolt of sky across her floor. Her sewing machine whirred a steady rhythmic pulse. Her fingers, deft and sure, guided the needle, weaving the intricate silver threads into the fabric, each stitch a tiny act of defiance. By late Saturday afternoon, she was exhausted, but exhilarated. The dress was taking shape in Florence, and it was even more beautiful than she had imagined. She decided to take a short break to clear her head before starting on the complex draping of the skirt. She made a cup of tea, her muscles aching, and finally picked up her phone. There were a dozen missed texts from Chloe. Chloe 1:15 p.m. You will not believe this. Chloe 1:18 p.m. Call me now. Chloe 1:30 p.m. Emiya, seriously. Stop sewing or whatever you're doing and look at this. Chloe 2:0 p.m. I'm sending you a link. You need to sit down first. Emiya's brow furrowed in confusion. Chloe was prone to drama, but this was a new level of intensity. The link was to a popular high-end gossip blog called The Gilded Cage, ironically the same nickname she had for Elysian. The headline of the top article made her heart stop. Ice Queen Tiffany Blackwood debuts mysterious new designer on Madison Avenue. Her finger trembled as she clicked the link. The page loaded, and a series of high-resolution paparazzi photos filled her screen. There was Tiffany Blackwood stepping out of a gleaming black Rolls-Royce, her expression one of bored superiority. She was wearing sunglasses the size of small plates and carrying a white Hermes Birkin bag. But it wasn't the car or the bag that made Emiya's breath catch in her throat. It was the dress. Tiffany was wearing her blouse. No, not her blouse. A dress. A sleek, perfectly tailored sheath dress in a soft periwinkle blue. And across the bodice in shimmering silver thread was an intricate pattern of leaf veins. It was her design. It was her exact, unique, hand-drawn design. Emiya's teacup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. She didn't even notice. She could only stare at the screen, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. The images were crystal clear. The stitching was a perfect replica of her own. The placement, the flow, the delicate artistry. It was all there, wrapped around the body of the woman who had mocked it less than 48 hours before. How was this even possible? Her mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Was it a coincidence impossible? The design was too specific, too personal. Had someone seen her sketches? No one had access to her apartment. Had she posted it online? Never. She was notoriously private about her work before it was ready. Then a sickening realization began to dawn. The restaurant, the night before, last. Tiffany had stared at her collar. Could she have? Emia scrolled frantically through the article. It was fawning and breathless, praising Tiffany's impeccable taste and her uncanny ability to discover the next big thing. While the label remains a mystery, the article read, "Sources close to Ms. Blackwood claim it's a bespoke piece from a new under-the-radar European atelier she discovered. The dress, a stunning display of hand embroidery signals, a move towards more artisanal fashion for the style icon. Blackwood is setting a trend, as always, leaving us all wondering who is this brilliant new designer and how can we get our hands on one of these creations, bespoke piece, European atelier. It was all lies, a carefully constructed narrative to shroud an ugly truth. Plagiarism, theft, the sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Tiffany hadn't just insulted her design, she had seen it, coveted it, and stolen it. She must have taken a surreptitious photo with her phone that night at the table. Then, with the kind of resources Emia couldn't even fathom, she must have commissioned a team of skilled seamstresses to replicate it overnight, turning a unique personal design into a disposable fast fashion trophy. The humiliation from Thursday night was nothing compared to this. This was a violation. This was the erasure of her art, of her identity as a creator. Tiffany Blackwood hadn't just taken a design. She had taken Emia's voice and was passing it off as her own. A cold, hard anger, unlike anything she had ever felt, settled in her chest. The shock gave way to a steely resolve. The dress hanging on her mannequin was no longer just a competition entry. It was evidence. It was her proof. The world thought Tiffany Blackwood was a trendsetter, a fashion icon. Emia knew she was a thief. The problem was, how could a waitress from Brooklyn prove it? It was her word against the billion-dollar machine that was Tiffany Blackwood and Jaden Croft. She looked from the photo on her screen to the nearly finished dress in her studio. Tiffany had a copy, but she, Emia Vance, had the original. She had the sketches, the fabric swatches, the calloused fingers from hours of hand-stitching. This was no longer just about winning a competition. This was about taking back what was hers. The world tilted on its axis. For the next 2 days, Emia operated in a state of hyper-focused rage. She finished the dress, every stitch now infused with a sense of righteous fury. It was without a doubt the best work she had ever done. The pain and violation had been alchemized into breathtaking art. She documented everything. She took high-resolution photos of the finished dress from every angle. She filmed herself with her phone, explaining the design process, showing her original sketches from months ago, her date-stamped notes, even the spool of unique French silver thread with its receipt. She was building a case, though she had no idea who she would ever present it to. Going to work at Elysian on Monday night felt like walking into the lion's den. She felt exposed, as if everyone knew her secret, her humiliation. Every whisper seemed to be about Tiffany's new dress. In the staff break room, one of the hostesses was scrolling through her phone. "Did you guys see this Tiffany Blackwood's new dress? Everyone on Instagram is trying to find out who the designer is. It's gorgeous." Emia felt a lump form in her throat and focused on polishing her wine glasses, her knuckles white. She had decided on a plan as desperate as it was. She would submit the dress to the competition on Wednesday, the day of the deadline. And she would anonymously send her dossier of proof to Chloe's magazine and a few other fashion journalists. It was a long shot. Tiffany's lawyers would probably crush the story before it ever saw the light of day. But she had to try. Tuesday evening, just as she was getting ready for her shift, her phone rang. The number was blocked. Normally she would ignore it, but some instinct made her answer. "Hello. Is this Emia Vance?" The voice was male, deep and steady. It was instantly recognizable. Emia's heart hammered against her ribs. It was Jaden Croft. She stood, frozen, phone pressed to her ear. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Jaden Croft. We were at your table at Elysian last Thursday." There was a pause. "I know this is unorthodox, but I need to speak with you. It's about the design. The one Tiffany was photographed in." Maya's mind went into overdrive. Was this a threat? Was he calling to buy her silence, to warn her off? "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice cold and defensive. There was another pause on the line. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, with no trace of menace. "Ms. Vance, Emia, I am a venture capitalist. My job, my entire career is built on one thing: pattern recognition. I find promising original ideas, and I help them grow. What I do not do is invest in frauds." Emia was silent, confused. "On Thursday night," he continued, "I saw the embroidery on your blouse. I didn't just glance at it. I saw it. The asymmetry, the specific way the thread caught the light, the tension in the stitches. It was unique. My mother was a textile artist. I grew up around looms and embroidery hoops. I noticed these things." He took a breath. "When I saw Tiffany in that dress on Saturday, my first thought was not how beautiful. It was how fast. My second thought was how identical. It wasn't inspired by. It was a photocopy. And I knew with absolute certainty that she had stolen it from you. I confronted her. She lied, of course, said she'd been working with a Parisian designer for months on it. It was a pathetic, transparent lie." Emia sank onto the edge of her bed, her legs suddenly weak. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I am calling you for 2 reasons, Jaden said, his tone shifting back to business. "First, to apologize for Tiffany's behavior at the restaurant, and for this egregious theft of your intellectual property. Her actions were appalling, and I have ended my relationship with her because of it." Emia's jaw dropped. He had broken up with her. Second, he went on, not waiting for a response, "I want to know about your work. I looked you up. There isn't much online, but I found a student portfolio from your time at Parsons. It's brilliant. Raw, but brilliant. You have a distinct creative signature. That dress Tiffany stole is just one example of it. I believe what I saw was not just a dress, but the launch of a brand. This couldn't be happening. It was too surreal." "What do you want?" Emia finally managed to say. "I want to offer you a meeting," he said simply. "Not at a restaurant. At my office, Croft Ventures. I want you to bring your sketches. Bring the original piece if you have it. I want you to pitch me. Not as a waitress, but as the founder and creative director of your company. I'm not interested in Tiffany's copy. I'm interested in the original. I'm interested in the artist." Emia was speechless. The man she had pegged as a silent, complicit partner to Tiffany's cruelty was revealing himself to be something else entirely. He was an investor who had spotted a diamond in the rough. He was a man of integrity who had severed ties with a liar. He was impossibly her ally. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" "Because Jaden Croft said," and for the first time there was a hint of warmth in his voice. "Great original talent is the rarest and most valuable commodity in the world, Miss Vance, and it deserves to be protected and funded." He proposed a meeting for the next afternoon. Emia, in a daze, agreed. After she hung up, she stared at her phone for a long time. The world had tilted again, but this time it was in her favor. The anger in her chest hadn't vanished, but it was now joined by a powerful, thrilling, new emotion, hope. She wasn't just going to get justice. She was going to get a seat at the table, her own table, and she would bring her portfolio, her sketches, and her magnificent, defiant periwinkle dress. The headquarters of Croft Ventures was a monument of steel and glass that pierced the midtown skyline. It was a world away from the hushed elegance of Elysian or the creative clutter of her apartment. This was a place of stark, clean lines, where ideas were dissected, valued, and turned into empires. Emiya walked into the lobby carrying a large professional portfolio case. Inside were her sketches, her business plan, and carefully folded in a protective garment bag the aura dress. She felt a nervous tremor in her hands, but forced herself to stand tall. She wore one of her own creations, a simple but flawlessly tailored black dress. Today she was not a waitress. She was Emiya Vance designer. A sleek assistant led her to a conference room on the 50th floor. The view was breathtaking, a panoramic vista of the city she had fought so hard to survive in. Jaden Croft was already there, standing by the window. He turned as she entered. In the harsh light of day, without the dim, flattering ambiance of the restaurant, he looked even more formidable. He was dressed in a sharp grey suit, no tie. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes held a look of genuine respect. "Ms. Vance, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the long marble table. "Please." "Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Croft," Emiya said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Jaden, please," he corrected. "Let's see what you have." For the next hour, Emiya laid out her vision. She didn't just show him sketches, she told him the story behind her brand, Iora. She spoke of sustainability, of creating timeless pieces, of celebrating artistry over fleeting trends. She spoke with a passion that had been bottled up for years. Jaden listened intently, asking sharp, insightful questions about production costs, market demographics, and scalability. He wasn't just looking at pretty drawings, he was stress-testing a business. Finally, she stood up. "And this," she said, "is the signature piece for my launch collection." She unzipped the garment bag and carefully lifted out the periwinkle dress. She draped it over a presentation mannequin she had requested. In the bright, sterile light of the conference room, it was even more spectacular. The silk seemed to drink the light, and the silver embroidery shimmered with an almost living energy. It was a work of art. Jaden stood and walked slowly around it, his expression unreadable. He reached out a hand, but stopped just short of touching the fabric. "This," he said quietly, his voice filled with something akin to awe, "is the original. The soul is in the stitches." At that exact moment, the door to the conference room opened. Emiya's head snapped up. Standing in the doorway, her face a mask of confusion that quickly morphed into rage, was Tiffany Blackwood. "Jaden, your assistant, said you were in a meeting, but I—" Her words died in her throat as she saw Emiya. Then her eyes landed on the dress. The real dress. Her face went pale. "What is she doing here?" Tiffany spat, her voice venomous. "And what is that? A cheap knockoff of my dress?" Jaden turned to face her, his expression as cold and hard as the marble table. "No, Tiffany. What you wore was a cheap knockoff. This is the original. You are looking at the work of Emiya Vance, the designer you stole from." The air crackled with tension. Emiya's heart was pounding, but she held her ground, standing beside her creation. This was the confrontation she had never thought she'd get. Tiffany's composure, her carefully crafted veneer of untouchable elegance, began to shatter. "Stole, that's a ridiculous accusation. I worked with a designer from Paris. I have receipts." "Do you?" Jaden asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Because I had my team do some digging. The atelier you claimed to work with doesn't exist. The dress was created in 24 hours by a rush order team in the garment district that specializes in replicating runway looks. I have their statement. They were paid handsomely for their speed and their discretion." But my offer was better. Every drop of color drained from Tiffany's face. She was caught. The lie had been completely dismantled. She turned her fury on Emir. You did this. You planned this. You're a nobody, a waitress. You think you can ruin me. You ruined yourself. Tiffany, Jaden said, his voice cutting through her tirade. You did it when you decided that your own name wasn't enough, that you had to steal someone else's talent and label it as your own. It's not just about the dress. It's about a fundamental lack of integrity. It's pathetic. The word hit Tiffany like a physical blow. Pathetic. It was the one thing her entire life was constructed to avoid. Tears of rage and humiliation welled in her eyes. She looked from Jaden's implacable face to Amaya's quiet, dignified strength, and finally at the beautiful dress that was the evidence of her own fraud. In that moment, she was stripped of her borrowed glamour, her power, her entire identity. She was just a thief in a very expensive suit. Without another word, she turned and fled, her heels clicking furiously on the marble floor. A heavy silence descended on the room. Emir finally let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She had expected to feel a sense of triumph, a rush of victory. Instead, she just felt a quiet, profound sense of validation. Jaden turned back to her, his expression softening. I'm sorry you had to witness that. I had already ended things, but she clearly didn't accept it. It's okay, Emir said. I think I needed to see that. He nodded, then looked back at the dress. A small, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time. So, Emir Vance, he said, his tone shifting back to business, though now it was filled with warmth and excitement. Let's talk numbers. I'm not just going to protect your brand. I'm going to build it with you. I want to offer Aura by Emir Vance its first round of seed funding, a 7-figure investment to start. Emir stared at him, the number echoing in the vast, silent room. 7 figures. It was a sum so large it felt like a dream. But this was real. The dress, the woman who had fled the man offering her a future. It was all real. She had walked into this glass tower as a struggling designer seeking justice. She was about to walk out as a funded CEO. The 6 months that followed were a whirlwind. The story, as these things often do in New York, leaked. It wasn't a loud, splashy expose. It was something more potent, a series of whispers and well-placed rumors within the exclusive circles of fashion and finance. The Gilded Cage blog, which had once praised Tiffany's discovery, ran a quiet retraction and a new feature piece. It was titled, "The Real Original Meet Emir Vance, the true designer behind the Madison Avenue mystery dress." Chloe had with great satisfaction helped connect the editor with Emir's new Croft-funded PR team. The article didn't viciously attack Tiffany. It didn't need to. It simply told Emir's story, showcasing her original sketches alongside the dress. It positioned her as a brilliant, authentic new talent. In the world of high fashion, being a copycat is a cardinal sin. Tiffany Blackwood's social currency plummeted. She wasn't just a fraud, she was irrelevant. She faded from the society pages, a cautionary tale whispered over cocktails at gallery openings. Emir, however, was just getting started. Jaden Croft's investment was more than just money, it was access. He connected her with the best in the business, seasoned production managers, savvy marketing experts, and top-tier fabric suppliers. But he was adamant about one thing. "Your vision is the core asset," he told her during one of their weekly strategy meetings in Aura's new Soho studio. "My team and I are here to build a structure around it, not to change it. You have full creative control. That is non-negotiable." He was true to his word. He was a mentor, not a micromanager. He challenged her, pushed her to think bigger, but never once tried to dilute her artistry. Their relationship remained professional, built on a deep mutual respect. He respected her talent and integrity. She respected his business acumen and his unwavering belief in her. Emir thrived under the pressure. The weight of waitressing shifts and financial insecurity was gone, replaced by the exhilarating challenge of building her dream from the ground up. She hired a small team of talented young pattern makers and seamstresses, paying them a fair wage she had only ever dreamed of. Her Soho studio, with its high ceilings and vast windows, was a world away from her cramped Brooklyn apartment, but she filled it with the same creative energy. Florence, her old mannequin, stood proudly in the corner, a reminder of where she had started. She poured her soul into her first collection. The periwinkle dress, which they named the Elysian, became the collection's centerpiece. But it was not alone. It was surrounded by 20 other pieces that all spoke the same language of quiet strength and intricate beauty. There were tailored coats with linings that revealed stunning hand-drawn prints, silk blouses with subtle, clever embroidery, and evening gowns that moved like liquid night. Her brand, Aura, by Emir Vance, began to generate serious buzz. They decided against a traditional launch. Instead of selling to big department stores, they would launch with an exclusive online boutique and a single, breathtaking flagship store in Soho. The strategy was to create scarcity and desire to make owning an Aura piece feel like acquiring a piece of art. The Emerging Designer Showcase. The competition she had been working towards had come and gone. She had withdrawn her application after accepting Jaden's funding. She was no longer an emerging designer. She was arriving. One afternoon, as she was overseeing the final touches on the store before its grand opening, Jaden stopped by. He watched as she adjusted the lighting on a mannequin displaying the Elysian, her expression one of intense focus. "You're a natural at this," he said, his voice making her look up. She smiled, a genuine tired but happy smile. "I've been dreaming about it for so long. It feels like I've done it 1,000 times in my head." "The best ventures always start that way," he said. He looked around the store at the minimalist decor, the artfully displayed clothes, the sense of calm elegance. "You've created more than a store, Emir. You've built a world." She felt a swell of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Jaden." "You would have," he corrected her gently. "It would have taken longer. The road would have been harder, but you would have gotten here. Talent like yours makes its own gravity. I just helped clear the path." The night before the official launch, the store was finished. It was perfect. Amaya stood alone in the center of the room, the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings in the air. She ran her hand over a rack of silk blouses, each one a testament to the sleepless nights, the sketches, the moments of doubt, and the final triumphant realization of her vision. She thought back to that night at Elysian, the humiliation, the feeling of being small and invisible. It felt like a lifetime ago, a scene from someone else's story. She wasn't that person anymore. She hadn't erased the waitress. She had honored her. She had taken her pain and stitched it into something beautiful. Tiffany Blackwood had tried to define her by a single cruel moment, but now, standing here surrounded by her life's work, made real Emir Vance knew she was the only one who had the power to define herself. Her brand was ready. Her new beginning was here. The opening of the Aura by Emir Vance flagship store was the most sought-after event of the New York fall fashion season. It wasn't a loud, flashy party with a DJ and overflowing champagne. It was an intimate, elegant affair for a curated list of top fashion editors, influential stylists and a handful of discerning actresses known for their taste. Emir stood near the entrance, a vision in one of her own designs, a deceptively simple column gown in a deep emerald green, its only adornment a delicate tracery of gold thread at the neckline, echoing her signature leaf vein motif. She was poised, confident, and greeted each guest with a warmth that was entirely her own. She wasn't playing the part of a designer. She was one. The store was filled with hushed, appreciative murmurs. Editors from Vogue and Harper's Bazaar ran their fingers over the fine fabrics. Stylists pulled pieces their minds, already dressing their A-list clients for the upcoming awards season. The story of the brand's origin was now the stuff of fashion legend, a tale of stolen art and ultimate vindication that made the clothes themselves even more compelling. Jaden Croft stood quietly in a corner, observing a rare, proud smile on his face. He was not there as a date or an escort, but as what he was, a founding investor, watching his most promising venture take flight. He caught Emia's eye across the room and gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. She smiled back a silent acknowledgement of their incredible journey. Late in the evening, a woman who had been browsing quietly approached Emia. She was older, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of unmistakable authority. It was Eleanor Vance, the legendary editor-in-chief of Vogue. "Ms. Vance," the editor said, her voice crisp. "I've been in this business for 40 years. I've seen brands come and go like the seasons. It's rare to see a debut collection with such a clear, confident voice." "Thank you, Ms. Vance." Emia said, her heart soaring. "That means the world to me." Eleanor gestured towards the Elysian dress, which stood on a central pedestal like a piece of sculpture. "That dress has quite a story," she said, her gaze sharp. "But a story is nothing without the talent to back it up. You have the talent. Welcome to the conversation." With that, she nodded and moved on, leaving Emia speechless. It was the highest form of praise, a coronation in a few simple sentences. The night was a resounding success. By morning, orders were flooding the website. An article in Women's Wear Daily declared Aura the most exciting brand debut in a decade. A month later, Emia found herself in a place she had only ever seen in magazines, sitting front row at a major runway show during Paris Fashion Week. Jaden had insisted she come to see the landscape, to meet other designers, to take her rightful place among her peers. As the lights dimmed and the music started, she felt a profound sense of peace. She was no longer on the outside looking in. She belonged here. Across the runway, in a less desirable seat, further down the line, she saw a familiar face. It was Tiffany Blackwood. She looked diminished. The flawless, icy confidence was gone, replaced by a desperate, hungry look. She was wearing a loud, logo-heavy outfit from a trendy brand, trying too hard to signal that she was still relevant. Her gaze flickered across the front row, a flash of envy in her eyes, as she saw the powerful editors, the top influencers, and Emia. Their eyes met for a brief electric moment across the polished runway. There was no triumph in Emia's gaze, no hint of, "I told you so." There was only a quiet, calm finality. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of forgiveness, but of closure. Tiffany looked away, first a flicker of her old shame, crossing her features before she hid it behind her sunglasses. At that moment, Emia knew the story was truly over. Tiffany Blackwood was no longer her villain, no longer a source of pain or anger. She was just a footnote in Emia's own, much grander story. A story that wasn't about revenge, but about resurrection. A story of how a waitress, dismissed and mocked in the shadows, found the courage to step into the light, wearing her own brilliant, undeniable aura. The show began, the models started their powerful walk, and Amia Vance, designer, turned her full attention to the future she had stitched into existence. Another year passed. Aura by Amia Vance was no longer the industry's darling newcomer. It was a respected fixture. The brand had become a quiet powerhouse, synonymous with integrity artistry and a form of elegance that felt earned, not bought. Amia had opened a second store in London and was scouting locations in Paris. She was a CEO, a creative director, an artist living her wildest dreams. Her life was a whirlwind of fabric sourcing, design meetings, and international flights. Her partnership with Jaden Croft had also evolved. He remained her most trusted advisor and the chairman of her board, a steady presence guiding the financial architecture of her growing empire. Their weekly meetings were the anchor of her hectic schedule, a masterclass in business strategy. Yet somewhere along the way, the lines had begun to blur. Their conversations would drift from profit margins to a shared love for obscure jazz, from marketing strategies to debates about classic films. A current of warmth and unspoken understanding now flowed beneath their professional dynamic. One crisp autumn afternoon at the end of a particularly intense quarterly review, Jaden put down his pen. "Amia," he said, his tone shifting from business to something more personal. "I'd like to take you to dinner on Saturday, to celebrate the London opening." Amia smiled. "Of course, Jaden. I'd love that. Where should I meet you?" He held her gaze, a small, knowing glint in his eyes. "I've made a reservation. Table 12, at Elysian." The name of the restaurant hung in the air between them. Elysian, the gilded cage, the scene of the crime. She hadn't set foot in the place since the day she quit 2 weeks after Jaden's investment had cleared. The memory was no longer painful, but it was a scar, a pale, thin line that reminded her of a wound that had long since healed. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "I've never been more sure," he replied. "It's time to write a new memory there." On Saturday night, Amia stood before the mirror in her spacious apartment overlooking Gramercy Park. She had thought about wearing the Elysian dress, but it felt like dwelling on the past. Instead, she chose a design from her newest collection. It was a jumpsuit in a fluid midnight blue crepe. It was sophisticated, powerful, and utterly modern. It wasn't a dress for a girl who had been wronged. It was the armor of a woman who had won. Walking through the heavy oak doors of Elysian was a surreal experience. The maitre d', a man who had barely acknowledged her existence for 2 years, rushed forward, his face breaking into a wide, obsequious smile. "Ms. Vance, what an absolute honor to have you with us. Mr. Croft is waiting." As he led her through the dining room, she felt the familiar hum of money and power, but it no longer intimidated her. She was not a ghost here anymore. She was a guest. She saw a few of her former colleagues. They watched her with wide, astonished eyes, and she gave them a small, warm smile of acknowledgement. Jaden stood as she approached table 12. He looked at her, and the appreciation in his eyes was for more than just the outfit. "Amia, you look incredible." "So do you," she said. And it was true. He seemed more relaxed here than she had ever seen him. The dinner was perfect, the service impeccable. They talked and laughed, and for the first time, their conversation was entirely devoid of business. They spoke of their childhoods of hopes that had nothing to do with market shares or 5-year plans. As the main course was cleared, Jaden leaned forward slightly. "I've never told you this," he began, his voice low. "But that night sitting here, when Tiffany said what she said, I was watching you, and I saw you refuse to break. I saw you absorb an incredibly cruel public insult with a dignity that was almost staggering. Yes, I saw your design and knew it was special. But what I really saw was your character. My investment, Amaya. It was always in you first and foremost. Amir felt a lump form in her throat. Jaden, I was breaking. On the inside, I was crumbling. I went home that night and almost gave up on everything. But you didn't, he said simply. That's the point. You went home, and you created something beautiful out of something ugly. That's a rare kind of strength. She looked at him, at this man who had changed her life. He had not been a fairy tale prince who had rescued a damsel in distress. He had been a discerning partner who had recognized her power when she couldn't see it herself. He had cleared the path, as he'd said, but he had trusted her to walk it on her own. Thank you, Jaden, she whispered. Not for the money, not for the business. Thank you for seeing me. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. It wasn't the gesture of an investor or a mentor. It was something more. I always see you, Amaya. The final barrier between them seemed to dissolve in the candlelight. The ghosts of the past were finally exorcised, replaced by the quiet, thrilling promise of a future. They were no longer just the designer and her investor. They were Amaya and Jaden. And this dinner wasn't an ending to an old chapter. It was the preface to a new one. Emir Vance's journey reminds us of a powerful truth. Your value is never determined by someone else's inability to see your worth. She took an act of cruel mockery and turned it into the fuel for her masterpiece. Her story isn't just about fashion, it's about integrity, resilience, and the incredible power of staying true to your own unique talent, your own aura. She didn't just get revenge on the woman who wronged her. She built an empire on the very foundation of the design that was meant to be her humiliation. It proves that the most powerful statement you can ever make is your own success. What did you think of Emir's story? Have you ever had a moment where someone underestimated you only for you to prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to read it. And if you found this story inspiring, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true life stories of justice and triumph. Thank you for listening.